They cut her harness at 8,000 feet with no warning. Staff Sergeant Catherine Cat Blackwood had exactly 3 seconds to understand she was being murdered by her own team before plummeting into the Afghan darkness. No parachute, no rope, no chance of survival. What her betrayers didn't know was that Cat Blackwood had been falling her entire life, and she had turned it into deadly art. This is the story of how one woman's refusal today exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command and how her impossible survival changed everything. If you're ready to witness the most incredible tale of betrayal, survival, and justice ever recorded, keep watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible military stories that will leave you speechless. I don't quit, Sergeant. Female Ranger thrown from 8,000 feet. Her impossible survival. Exposed military conspiracy, Part 1, the betrayal. The Black Hawk was already at 8,000 feet when they cut her harness. No warning, no explanation, just the crew chief's knife slicing through the straps that kept Staff Sergeant Catherine Blackwood secured to the helicopter floor. She had exactly 3 seconds to understand what was happening before two sets of hands shoved her out the door into the Afghan night. No parachute, no rope, no chance. At least that's what the 5 Delta Force operators watching from the cabin thought. They were about to learn why the 75th Ranger Regiment had kept Catherine Blackwood's file classified for 7 years. In that same moment, halfway across the world at the Pentagon, Colonel James Harrington's phone buzzed with an urgent message. The weathered officer with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war glanced at the screen, Phoenix down. His face hardened as he pushed away the reports scattered across his desk. Something had gone terribly wrong in Afghanistan. The UH-60 Blackhawk continued its flight path over the Hindu Kush Mountains, rotors slicing through the thin air at altitude. Inside the cabin, Master Sergeant Derek Kane watched the black emptiness where Blackwood had disappeared. The night vision goggles gave his scarred face an eerie green glow as he turned to his team. "Mission update," Kane announced through the intercom. "The package has been delivered." The other operators nodded, their faces masks of professional indifference. All except Specialist Thomas Miller, whose fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his rifle. 8,000 feet below Catherine Blackwood was falling through darkness, the cold mountain air tearing at her uniform. Most people would scream, most people would flail, most people would die. Cat Blackwood wasn't most people. 10 years earlier at Fort Benning, Georgia, a younger Cat Blackwood stood at attention before Master Sergeant Jake Ironside Sullivan. At 61, Sullivan was a living legend in the Rangers, his weathered face telling the story of deployments across 3 decades, Bosnia, Grenada, Desert Storm, and countless classified operations during the Cold War. "You think you're ready for Halo training, Blackwood?" Sullivan's voice was gravel and steel. "Yes, Sergeant," she replied, eyes forward. Sullivan circled her like a predator. 8 Rangers started this course last month. 3 finished. What makes you different?" "I don't quit, Sergeant." He stopped in front of her. The late Georgia's sun cast long shadows across the training ground. "That's what they all say. But when you're falling through the air at terminal velocity, when your primary chute fails and you have seconds to deploy your reserve before you become a crater, that's when we learn who's a Ranger and who just wears the tab." What Sullivan didn't know then was that Cat Blackwood had been falling her entire life. Daughter of Master Sergeant Robert Blackwood, killed in action during Operation Just Cause in Panama, her mother, broken by grief, had followed him to the grave 2 years later. Cat had grown up a ward of her uncle himself, a retired Army sergeant. "I've read your file," Sullivan continued. "Former competitive wingsuit flyer. National champion. Why'd you give that up for this?" Cat's eyes never wavered. "My father was a Ranger sergeant. He used to say, 'Rangers lead the way.' I intend to honor that." Something in Sullivan's expression shifted. He'd lost his only daughter in a car accident 5 years earlier. Perhaps he recognized something in Blackwood's determination, something familiar in her eyes. "Your father was at Urgent Fury in Grenada. I knew him. Good man." That was the first day Sullivan took a personal interest in Blackwood's training. Not that he made it easier for her. If anything, he pushed her harder, made her jump more, train longer, endure more than the others. He taught her the old ways, techniques developed during the Cold War, when special operators had to function without the technology modern soldiers took for granted. "Technology fails," he'd say, tapping his temple. "Equipment breaks." He'd thump his chest over his heart. But this, he'd tap his temple again, and this, another thump to his chest. These never fail a true Ranger. On the night of her final qualification jump, when her primary chute had indeed malfunctioned, just as Sullivan had predicted, Cat hadn't panicked. She'd followed the procedures, deployed her reserve, and landed safely. When she found Sullivan waiting at the landing zone, she thought he might finally offer praise. Instead, he'd said, "Remember this feeling. Someday you might not have a reserve chute. Someday all you'll have is your training and your will to live. When that day comes, remember, it's not the speed that kills you, it's the direction of impact. Control that, and you might survive." Words that now, a decade later, echoed in her mind as she plummeted through the Afghan night. At 32, Staff Sergeant Catherine Blackwood was the most effective operator in her unit. 5'9", lean and athletic, rather than bulky, with short dark hair and eyes that never seemed to settle on any one thing for long. The kind of woman who could disappear in a crowd or command a room depending on what the mission required. Her personnel file listed impressive qualifications: expert marksman, advanced survival training, fluent in 3 languages. What it didn't mention were the 12 operations she'd led disrupting weapons smuggling networks in the Korangal Valley. Operations that had eliminated 3 high-value targets and intercepted Soviet-era weapons bound for insurgent groups. Operations that had apparently made her some powerful enemies. Forward Operating Base Chapman hummed with pre-mission activity. The briefing room was stifling despite the late hour. Captain Bennett stood at the front, the blue glow of the tactical display illuminating his face as he outlined the operation. "Intelligence has confirmed Ahmed Zarif's location," Bennett said, indicating a compound on the satellite image. "High-value target, bomb maker facilitator, responsible for 3 KIA last month." Kat sat apart from the others, methodically checking her gear. 5 years in the Rangers had taught her that the quiet moments before a mission were when death liked to introduce himself. "Delta team will handle the ground assault." Bennett continued, nodding toward the 5 operators lounging at the back of the room. "Staff Sergeant Blackwood, you're sitting this one out." Kat looked up, hands still working on her equipment. "Sir, orders from command. Delta needs the flight hours and terrain familiarization. You're riding along as observer only, no ground ops." The Delta Force team, led by Master Sergeant Derek Kane, looked like they'd been carved from the same block of granite, all sharp angles and barely contained violence. Kane himself had the kind of face that suggested he collected knife fights as souvenirs. Kat caught the eye of Specialist Diego Rivera, her usual tech support. His expression said everything, something's wrong. After the briefing, Kat found a quiet corner to make a call. Sullivan answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Wild Bill's taxidermy, you kill it, we fill it." Despite the situation, Kat almost smiled. "It's Blackwood. Kid, it's dark 30 here. This better be good. I've been benched on a high-value target mission. Delta's taking point. They want me as terrain familiarization only." A long pause. "Delta, huh? Which unit?" "Operational Detachment Alpha, led by Master Sergeant Derek Kane." Another pause, longer this time. When Sullivan spoke again, his voice had lost all traces of sleep. "Listen carefully. Kane was investigated after an operation in Fallujah went sideways. 3 Rangers died. Nothing was proven, but there were questions about missing weapons from an insurgent cache." Kat felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "You think he's dirty?" "I think wolves don't change their nature just because they put on sheep's clothing. Watch your 6, Blackwood. And remember what I taught you about backup comms and contingency plans." The line went dead. Kat stared at her phone for a long moment before heading to the armory. If she was just observing, she shouldn't need more than a standard combat load. She took double. Rivera found her there, loading magazines into her tactical vest. "This stinks," he said without preamble. "You've led 16 operations in the Korangal. Now suddenly you're taxi service." Kat slipped another magazine into her vest. "Orders are orders." "Yeah, well, I added something to your kit." Rivera handed her what looked like a standard tactical radio. "It's got a built-in recordance, an emergency beacon, old-school tech broadcasts on frequencies most modern systems ignore. Something I've been working on." "You think I'll need it?" Rivera's expression was grim. "I think someone's trying to sideline one of our best operators during a mission to capture a high-value target with known connections to Soviet-era weapons dealers. Make your own conclusions." Kat nodded, securing the device. "Watch yourself while I'm gone. If this feels wrong to both of us, there's a reason." The tarmac thrummed with activity as the Black Hawk prepared for departure. The Hindu Kush Mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky so clear it hurt to look at it. Kat positioned herself near the door gunner, ostensibly to observe the terrain, but really because it gave her the best field of view and quickest access to her sidearm if needed. The Delta team filed in, taking positions around the cabin with practiced efficiency. Kane nodded to Cat, his expression unreadable behind his tactical gear. At precisely 2300 hours, the Black Hawk lifted off rotors, beating the thin mountain air into submission. The night vision goggles made everyone look like prehistoric insects in the green-tinted darkness. 20 minutes into the flight, the intercom crackled. "Approaching phase line Alpha," the pilot announced. 3 minutes to target. That's when Kane stood up. The movement was casual, as if he was stretching, but Kat's hand drifted toward her sidearm. In the green wash of her night vision, she saw him signal his team, small gestures nearly invisible, but she'd learned to read violence in all its languages. "Blackwood," Kane's voice came through her headset, conversational despite the rotor noise. "You know what your problem is?" She turned slightly, keeping her peripheral vision on the other Delta operators who were shifting position, creating a box around her. "Enlighten me." "You're too good." Commands noticed. "The Korangal belongs to you. Every warlord, every smuggler, every fighter knows the female ranger who walks their mountains like she was born there." He moved closer, and now Cat could see the others adjusting their positions, creating a perimeter around her. "That kind of reputation is bad for business." "Whose business?" Cat asked, buying time while her mind ran through options. 5 operators, confined space 8,000 feet up. The math wasn't good. The kind that pays better than Army salary. His hand moved to his knife, not threatening, just resting there. Zarif isn't just a bomb maker. He's a facilitator. Weapons information, he moves it all. And he pays handsomely to anyone who removes obstacles. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a mission. It was an execution. "How much?" she asked. 100,000 each, plus future considerations. Kane actually smiled. "Nothing personal, Blackwood. You're just too effective. The smuggling routes need to stay open, and you keep closing them. So you throw me out of a helicopter and tell everyone it was an accident. Equipment malfunction. Happens all the time in these mountains. Harness fails, soldier falls, tragic accident. Full military honors." He pulled the knife free, its blade black against the green night vision world. "Unless you want to make this difficult." Kat's mind processed a dozen scenarios in the space between heartbeats. She could fight, but 5-on-1 in a confined space would end badly. She could call for help, but the pilots might be in on it. She could. The knife moved faster than thought, slicing through her harness straps with surgical precision. Before she could react, hands grabbed her arms, her vest lifting and pushing in one coordinated motion. The Black Hawk's door yawned open beside her, and Catherine Blackwood fell into the void. In that moment of free-fall, time seemed to slow. The cold air whipped past her face as gravity accelerated her body toward the unforgiving earth below. But while most people would panic, Cat Blackwood's training kicked in with machine-like precision. Terminal velocity for a human body in standard position is approximately 120 mph. But Cat wasn't in standard position. She'd spent years as a competitive wingsuit flyer before joining the Rangers. She knew how to manipulate her body in free fall, how to create drag and control her descent. She spread her arms and legs, creating maximum surface area. The tactical jacket she wore, a modified design based on Sullivan's Cold War-era specifications, had extra material under the arms and between the legs. Not a true wingsuit, but enough to slow her descent and provide some directional control. As she fell, her mind was eerily calm, methodically working through a survival checklist. Kane thought he'd eliminated a problem. What he'd actually done was unleash Catherine Blackwood's most specialized skill set. 8,000 feet gave her approximately 60 seconds of free fall. In those 60 seconds, she had to accomplish the impossible, survive a fall that no one survives. The night vision goggles were still secure on her head. Through them, she could make out the terrain below. The mountainside was steep, covered in forest on the upper slopes with patches of snow. No landing zone would be survivable at her current velocity. But perhaps, Cat adjusted her body position, angling toward the densest patch of forest she could see. Trees meant branches. Branches meant potential energy absorption, a way to gradually slow her fall before the final impact. Sullivan's voice echoed in her mind. "It's not the speed that kills you, it's the direction of impact. Control that, and you might survive." The forest was rushing up to meet her now. Cat tucked her arms and legs, making herself as small as possible, to penetrate the canopy, then flung them wide again just as she hit the first branches. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Limbs snapped against her body, but each branch that broke absorbed some of her momentum. Her tactical vest designed to stop bullets now served as makeshift body armor against the brutal impact of branches and trunk fragments. Still, she felt ribs crack, her left collarbone snap. The night vision goggles were torn away, leaving her in darkness. For what seemed like eternity, but was probably only seconds, Cat crashed through the forest canopy, her body pinballing between branches, each impact slowing her descent, but exacting a terrible physical toll. Then came the final impact, not with hard ground, but with a steep slope covered in several feet of spring snow. The angle transformed what would have been a fatal vertical impact into a horizontal slide. Physics was working in her favor, distributing the remaining force of her fall across distance rather than concentrating it in a single catastrophic moment. Kat's world became a kaleidoscope of pain as she tumbled down the mountainside, finally coming to rest in a drift of snow beneath a rocky outcropping. For several minutes, she lay perfectly still, her breath forming small clouds in the cold mountain air. The fact that she was breathing at all was a miracle, or rather, it was the result of extensive training, specialized knowledge, and an absolute refusal to die on someone else's terms. Slowly, methodically, Kat took inventory of her injuries. Left collarbone definitely broken. At least 3 ribs cracked. Right knee twisted, possibly torn ligaments. Countless cuts and bruises. Likely concussion based on the nausea and double vision. Serious but not immediately fatal. She could move. She could think. She could fight. And Staff Sergeant Catherine Blackwood very much intended to fight. With careful movements that sent lightning bolts of pain through her body, Kat reached into a hidden pocket of her tactical vest. The recording device Rivera had given her was still there, still functioning. It had captured everything: Kane's confession, the sound of her harness being cut the moment she was pushed from the aircraft. Evidence. Proof of treason and attempted murder. But evidence only mattered if she survived long enough to deliver it. And right now, survival was far from guaranteed. Kat knew the Delta team wouldn't leave loose ends. Once they completed their mission, they would come looking for her body to ensure there was nothing left to find. She needed to move to find shelter, to create distance between herself and the inevitable search. Using techniques Sullivan had drilled into her during SERE training, Kat fashioned a makeshift sling for her broken collarbone from strips of her undershirt. She applied pressure bandages from her med kit to the worst of the lacerations. The military-grade painkillers would keep her functional for about 6 hours. After that, she'd be running on pure determination. The night was clear but brutally cold at this elevation. Exposure would kill her as surely as her injuries if she didn't find proper shelter. Kat oriented herself using the stars identifying the North Star through a gap in the trees. The nearest American outpost was approximately 20 miles southeast, an impossible journey in her current condition. But 7 miles east lay a small village where she'd built connections during previous operations. If she could reach it, there might be help to be found, or at least a warm place to plan her next move. With a grunt of pain, Kat pushed herself to her feet. Every part of her body screamed in protest, but she forced herself to take one step, then another. Rangers didn't quit. Rangers led the way, even when that way was a desperate nighttime trek across hostile mountain terrain with a broken body and killers on her trail. At the Pentagon, Colonel James Harrington stared at his secure phone, a cold dread settling in his stomach. The message "Phoenix Down" was a distress code established decades ago during the Cold War, used only in the most dire circumstances. It was part of an emergency protocol developed for deep cover operatives who had been compromised. The fact that it was connected to Staff Sergeant Catherine Blackwood was deeply troubling. Harrington had been watching Blackwood's career with interest. Her father had served under him during operations in Grenada, and the daughter had proven every bit as capable as the father. Harrington accessed a secure terminal, pulling up the mission details for Operation Copper Valley. What he found raised immediate red flags. The mission parameters had been changed 3 times in the 24 hours before deployment. Blackwood had been originally listed as mission lead, then demoted to support, and finally to observer status. The authorization codes for these changes traced back to General Marcus Thornfield, a man whose star had risen rapidly in recent years, despite a questionable track record in the field. Thornfield had also been the one to assign Kane's Delta team to the operation. Harrington's eyes narrowed. During his 30-year career, he'd developed a sixth sense for when something wasn't right. Right now, that sense was screaming at him. He placed a secure call to a number few people knew existed. "Checkmate, actual," a voice answered. "This is Castle. I need eyes on Copper Valley, immediate priority. Possible Phoenix situation." A pause. "Authentication. Whiskey Sierra 1975 Broken Arrow Protocol." Another pause. Acknowledge. Stand by for update. Harrington ended the call and opened his desk drawer, removing a worn leather duress book. It contained names and numbers not found in any official database contacts cultivated over decades of service. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Hello, the voice was gruff, suspicious. Jake, it's Jim Harrington. Harrington, Jesus Christ, it's the middle of the night. This better be important. Blackwood's in trouble, deep trouble. The line went silent for a moment. When Sullivan spoke again, all traces of sleep were gone from his voice. Tell me. As Cat Blackwood made her painful way down the mountainside, Sullivan was already in motion, throwing essential gear into a rucksack with the efficiency of a man who had never really left the service, despite his retirement papers. The old Ranger had spent the past decade training the next generation of special operators, passing on knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual techniques developed during the Cold War, when American operatives had gone toe-to-toe with KGB-trained adversaries in shadow wars across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Catherine Blackwood had been his most promising student, not just because of her physical abilities, though those were exceptional. It was her mind, her ability to adapt to see patterns and solutions where others saw only problems. She reminded him of his daughter, the one he'd lost to a drunk driver 15 years ago. Perhaps that's why he'd pushed her harder than the others, why he'd taught her things beyond the standard curriculum. Old techniques, survival methods, communication protocols from an era when you couldn't trust the latest technology because the enemy might be listening. Like the emergency beacon frequency programmed into the custom radio Rivera had given her a frequency monitored by a network of old Cold Warriors who had never quite trusted the new digital systems that had replaced their analog equipment. A network that was now lighting up with a distress signal from the mountains of Afghanistan. In the Black Hawk, Master Sergeant Derek Kane received confirmation that the primary mission was complete. Ahmed Zarif was in custody, being transported to a separate extraction point. What about the secondary objective? A voice asked over his secure comm. Package delivered, Kane replied coolly. No recovery possible from that altitude. Confirmed visual on impact. Negative. Night conditions, but there's no surviving a fall from 8,000 without a chute. Circle back, confirm. We need to be certain. Kane signaled the pilot. Change of plans. They needed to check something on the southeast slope. The Black Hawk banked, turning back toward the area where Blackwood had fallen. Kane switched channels to address his team privately. She's gone, but command wants confirmation. We'll do a sweep, find the body, take photos for verification, then complete extraction. Miller, you're on point for the ground search. Jensen, backup. The rest of us provide perimeter security. Specialist Thomas Miller nodded, his face professionally blank behind his tactical gear. But something in his eyes had changed since watching Blackwood get thrown from the aircraft. Something that looked like doubt. As the helicopter descended toward a small clearing, none of them noticed the faint signal being transmitted from the mountainside below, a signal using a frequency modern military communication systems ignored as obsolete. A signal that was being received by people they didn't know existed. People who had spent the Cold War preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. Cat Blackwood had covered less than 2 miles when she heard the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors echoing across the valley. She immediately sought cover, crawling beneath a rocky overhang just as searchlights began sweeping the mountainside. They were looking for her body, and if they found her alive instead, they would ensure she didn't stay that way. Through the pain-induced haze, Cat's training took over. Sullivan's voice in her head, when the enemy has air superiority, become the ground. She pulled branches and snow over her position, regulating her breathing to minimize the vapor cloud in the cold air. The makeshift camouflage wouldn't hold up to close inspection, but it might be enough to avoid detection from the air. The helicopter circled lower its searchlight, illuminating patches of forest and snow. Cat could make out the silhouette of the Black Hawk against the night sky, the same aircraft she'd been thrown from less than an hour ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Black Hawk settled into a small clearing about half a mile from her position. Through gaps in the foliage, Cat could see figures disembarking, their movements precise and tactical. They were setting up a search pattern, spreading out to comb the area where they expected to find her broken body. They wouldn't find a body, but if she didn't move, they would eventually find her. With agonizing care, Cat began to crawl away from the search zone, staying low, using natural depressions in the ground for cover. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through her injured body, but she pushed through it, focusing on the mechanics of silent movement rather than the pain. A training exercise from Fort Benning flashed in her mind. Sullivan had broken her collarbone during a particularly brutal close-quarters combat drill. Rather than sending her to medical, he'd made her complete the course. In the real world, he'd said, "You don't get to tap out because you're hurt. You adapt, you overcome, you complete the mission." Despite the pain, she had hated him that day. Now she silently thanked him as she applied those lessons to stay alive. The search team was methodical, using their night vision gear to scan the forest floor and lower branches for signs of impact. They were professionals, thorough and disciplined, but they were looking for a dead woman, not a living one with decades of survival training. That mistake would cost them. Cat reached a small stream, its icy water flowing beneath a thin crust of ice. Perfect. Water would mask her heat signature from thermal imaging and help obscure her trail. With a silent apology to her broken body, she slid into the frigid current, using the streambed as a path away from her pursuers. The cold was shocking, immediately numbing her extremities and making her injured ribs seize in protest. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning rage that had taken root inside her. These men, her supposed brothers-in-arms, had betrayed not just her, but everything the uniform stood for. They had sold their honor, their oath, their country for money. They had tried to kill her to protect a smuggling baron that was putting weapons in the hands of America's enemies. Cat Blackwood had never considered herself particularly patriotic in the flag-waving, slogan-shouting sense. Her patriotism was quieter, more practical. It was about doing the job, protecting her team, completing the mission. But this betrayal, this was personal. This was an attack not just on her, but on everything she had dedicated her life to protecting. As she pulled herself from the stream nearly a mile later, shivering uncontrollably, but well clear of the search zone, Cat made herself a promise. She would survive, she would recover, and then she would bring the full weight of justice down on Derek Kane and everyone connected to his operation. Rangers led the way, and Catherine Blackwood was about to lead these traitors straight to hell. At Fort Bragg, William Sullivan was boarding a C-17 transport aircraft, accompanied by a hand-picked team of former Rangers men like himself, older but far from obsolete veterans of conflicts. Most Americans had never heard of operations that would remain classified long after they were dead. Colonel Harrington had pulled strings, calling in favors accumulated over 3 decades of service. The official paperwork described it as a training exercise, a demonstration of veteran techniques for active duty special forces. The unofficial mission was considerably more urgent: extract Staff Sergeant Catherine Blackwood from hostile territory and expose a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of military command. As the massive aircraft thundered down the runway, Sullivan checked his equipment one final time. The gear was newer than what he'd used in his active duty days, but the principles remained the same. Go in light, move fast, adapt to changing conditions, complete the mission. His team consisted of 5 former operators, all men he had served with, men he trusted with his life, men who had jumped at the chance to get back in the game, especially when they learned the mission involved saving one of their own from betrayal. Beside him sat Michael Reeves, a former communications specialist who had spent the Cold War intercepting Soviet transmissions across Eastern Europe. Reeves had maintained his skills and his equipment in retirement, keeping vintage communications gear operational in his basement workshop. It was Reeves who had picked up Blackwood's distress signal, a specialized burst transmission, on a frequency modern systems ignored as obsolete, a frequency Sullivan had insisted Blackwood memorize during her training. "Signal still active," Reeves said, adjusting dials on a receiver that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Weak but steady. She's alive, Jake." Sullivan nodded, his weathered face betraying no emotion. But inside, a fierce pride burned. Blackwood was alive. Despite being thrown from an aircraft at 8,000 feet, she had survived the impossible, just as he'd trained her to do. Now they just had to reach her before Kane's team realized their mistake and corrected it. The C-17 banked eastward, its 4 massive engines propelling it toward Afghanistan at over 500 mph. In the cargo hold, Sullivan's team prepared their equipment with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this countless times before. No unnecessary conversation, no wasted movement, just the focused preparation of warriors returning to the battlefield one last time. For Catherine Blackwood, each step was an exercise in agony management. The cold mountain air stabbed at her lungs with every breath. Her broken collarbone sent white-hot lances of pain through her shoulder with every movement. The makeshift splint she'd created was functional, but far from comfortable. But pain was just information Sullivan had taught her. Useful information about her body's condition, but not a command to be obeyed. The command came from her will, her determination to survive. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten as Cat approached the village she'd targeted as her sanctuary. The small cluster of stone buildings nestled in a protected valley had been a frequent stop during her previous operations in the region. Unlike many American forces who maintained distance from the local population, Cat had made a point of building relationships. She had learned the language, respected the customs, treated the villagers as allies rather than potential threats. That investment might now save her life. As she approached the outskirts of the village, Cat activated the emergency beacon on Rivera's custom radio. One short burst enough to update her position without giving too much away if Kane's team was monitoring frequencies. The village was quiet in the pre-dawn hours, smoke rising from a few chimneys the only sign of life. Kat made her way to a small house on the eastern edge belonging to a man named Kareem, a former interpreter for American forces who had retired to his ancestral home after years of service. She knocked softly on the wooden door, leaning heavily against the wall to support her failing body. Footsteps approached from inside and the door opened a crack. Kareem's weathered face appeared, eyes widening as he took in her condition. "Allah have mercy," he whispered, opening the door wider. "Come quickly." Kat stumbled inside the warmth of the small house, washing over her like a physical force. The contrast with the mountain cold made her injuries throb with renewed intensity. "You are injured," Kareem stated, helping her to a low cot near the central hearth. "What has happened?" "Betrayed," Kat managed through clenched teeth. "My own people tried to kill me." Kareem's expression darkened as he helped her remove her frozen outer layers. His wife appeared from another room, gasping at Kat's condition before quickly gathering medical supplies. "The men who searched the mountain," Kareem said, "they are looking for you." And Kat nodded. "They think I'm dead. Need to keep it that way until I can contact my real allies." "Your radio," Kareem gestured to the device visible in her vest. "Emergency beacon only. Limited transmission range." Kat winced as Kareem's wife began treating her wounds with gentle efficiency. "I need to reach someone outside the normal chain of command." Kareem considered this, then nodded decisively. "I have something that might help. From the old days when my father fought against the Soviets with your CIA friends." He disappeared into another room, returning moments later with what looked like an antique radio set, the kind used by resistance fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s. American-made, very old, but still works. Uses frequencies the Taliban and others ignore, too primitive for them to bother with. Kat felt a surge of hope as she recognized the equipment. Sullivan had shown her similar devices during her training, part of his lessons on old-school communication techniques. "If your friends know to listen on these old frequencies, they will hear you," Kareem said, setting up the radio next to her cot. With painful movements, Kat adjusted the settings, tuning to a specific frequency Sullivan had made her memorize years ago, a frequency monitored by a network of retired operators who had never quite trusted the digital revolution. "This is Phoenix," she spoke into the microphone using the call sign Sullivan had assigned her during training. "Phoenix to any checkmate station. Emergency authentication code Sierra Tango 7903. I am compromised but alive. Repeat, compromised but alive." She released the transmission button, waiting for a response, while Kareem's wife continued treating her injuries. The pain medications from her emergency kit were wearing off, and each breath brought fresh waves of agony. The radio crackled with static filling the small room. Then miraculously a voice emerged from the speaker. "Phoenix, this is Checkmate Actual. Authentication confirmed. Sit rep." Kat closed her eyes in relief, recognizing Colonel Harrington's voice. "Checkmate Actual, this is Phoenix. I have been compromised by friendly forces, pushed from aircraft at altitude, survived with injuries. In temporary shelter with trusted local contact. Hostile forces searching within 5-mile radius. I have recorded evidence of treason and attempted murder by Master Sergeant Derek Kane and Delta Team." A pause, then Harrington's voice returned, tension evident despite the poor connection. "Phoenix rescue package inbound, ETA 12 hours. Can you maintain position?" Kat looked at Kareem, who nodded firmly. "Affirmative, checkmate. Position secure for now. Be advised, Kane Team has air support and ground search capabilities. Approach with caution." "Understood, Phoenix. Ironside sends his regards. Says to tell you he's bringing your graduation present." Despite everything, Kat felt her lips curve in a painful smile. Ironside was Sullivan's old call sign. The graduation present was their code for an extraction operation. Sullivan was coming personally. "Acknowledge, checkmate. Tell Ironside I'll save him some tea. Stay alive, Phoenix. Checkmate out." As the radio fell silent, Kat allowed herself a moment of pure exhaustion. Her body was failing, the adrenaline that had kept her moving finally depleted. but her mind remained sharp, focused on survival and what would come after. Derek Kane and his team had made a critical error. They had tried to kill Catherine Blackwood, but they had only succeeded in making her more dangerous, because now she had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. Rangers led the way even when that way was paved with betrayal, pain, and the long road to justice. The sun rose over the Hindu Kush mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of gold and rose. A new day was dawning, and with it, the hunt was about to change directions. Part 2, The Hunt. The memory of falling dominated Catherine Blackwood's dreams. Her body remembered what her conscious mind tried to suppress: the sickening lurch as gravity claimed her, the howling wind, the desperate calculations made in fractions of seconds. She jerked awake on Kareem's cot, a cry strangled in her throat, her body instantly punishing her with waves of pain for the sudden movement. "Easy, Sergeant Blackwood," Kareem's wife Fatima said softly, pressing a cool cloth to Kat's forehead. "You are safe here." Safe was a relative term. Kat's trained ears picked up the distant thump of helicopter rotors. Kane's team was still searching, still hunting. The small window beside her showed late afternoon light. She'd been unconscious for hours. Precious time lost. "Water?" She managed, her voice a rasp. Fatima helped her drink, supporting her head with gentle hands that reminded Kat of her mother, long gone now. When Kat had taken her fill, she attempted to sit up, gritting her teeth against the stabbing pain in her collarbone and ribs. "How bad is it?" she asked Fatima, who had clearly been tending her wounds while she slept. "3 ribs broken, collarbone broken, many cuts, much bruising," Fatima replied in careful English. "But you are strong. Already your body fights to heal." Kat nodded, taking inventory of her injuries. The makeshift splint on her collarbone had been replaced with a more professional binding. The worst of her cuts had been cleaned and bandaged. She was still in terrible shape, but marginally better than before. "My equipment." "Safe," Kareem answered, entering the room with a steaming cup of tea. "Your special radio still sends its signal. Your weapons are clean and ready." Kat accepted the tea with her good hand. "Thank you, both of you. I know the risk you're taking." Kareem's weathered face creased in a smile. "You have protected our village many times, Sergeant Blackwood. You respect our ways. The others, they see only potential enemies. You see people." The simple truth of his words touched Kat more deeply than she expected. In this moment of betrayal by her own countrymen, the loyalty of these Afghan villagers was a powerful reminder of why her mission mattered in the first place. The helicopter sounds grew louder, then began to fade again. "Another search pattern," Kat observed. "They aren't giving up." "They will not find what they expect to find," Kareem said, following her gaze toward the window. "My son has laid false trails, pieces of cloth blood from a goat. They will chase ghosts while you regain your strength." Kat nodded appreciatively. Kareem had been an interpreter, but before that, he had fought against the Soviets as a young man. He understood counterintelligence tactics. "I need to check in," she said, reaching for the old radio set. With careful movements, Kat adjusted the settings and transmitted another brief message. "Phoenix to checkmate, position stable, hostiles still active in area." The response came almost immediately. "Phoenix, checkmate actual. Package inbound, ETA 9 hours. Ironside says prepare for midnight reunion." 9 hours? She had to hold on for 9 more hours. Then Sullivan and whatever team he'd assembled would arrive. The question was whether Kane would give up the search before then. Kat doubted it. The stakes were too high. Her survival meant his death either by military justice or at the hands of whoever had paid him to eliminate her. He would keep searching until he found a body or created one. "I need to move," Kat said, attempting to stand. The room swam before her eyes, and she would have fallen if Kareem hadn't caught her. "You need rest," he insisted, easing her back onto the cot. "Your body has survived what would kill most men. Give it time to recover." "Time is the one thing I don't have," Kat replied, but she relented, knowing he was right. In her current state, she'd never make it out of the village, let alone evade capture. "Then let us help you prepare," Kareem said. "When your friends come, you must be ready to move quickly." Over the next hour, Kareem and Fatima helped Kat create a more sustainable medical plan. They fashioned a proper sling for her broken collarbone using materials from the village. Fatima prepared a paste of local herbs that, when applied to Kat's ribs, provided surprising relief from the constant pain. Kareem's son, Tariq, a young man of perhaps 20, arrived with news from his false trail-laying expedition. "The Americans search the eastern ridges now," he reported. "They argue among themselves. The leader grows angry." "How many?" Kat asked. 5 foreign American uniforms. One wears clothing like the village hunters. He is the one who tracks you most carefully." A local guide, that complicated things. While Kane and his Delta operators were formidable, they were outsiders in these mountains. A local tracker changed the equation significantly. Can you describe the tracker? Cat asked. Tariq nodded. Tall bearded has a scar here. He traced a line from his left eye down his cheek. He carries an old Russian rifle and American binoculars. Cat's blood ran cold. She knew exactly who Tariq was describing. Nazir Khan, a notorious smuggler who controlled many of the mountain passes in this region. A man whose operations she had disrupted more than once. They've hired Khan, she told Kareem, whose expression darkened immediately. This is bad news, Kareem said. Khan knows these mountains better than anyone, and he has many eyes people in many villages who will report to him. But not this village, Kat asked, suddenly concerned about her sanctuary. Kareem's expression hardened. Khan's men killed my brother 2 winters ago when he refused to pay their protection fee. There is no love for him here. That was something at least. But Khan's involvement meant the search would become more effective, more targeted. The false trails that might fool Americans wouldn't deceive a man who had spent his life in these mountains. I need a backup plan, Kat said. Somewhere to go if this location is compromised. Kareem considered this, then nodded. There is a place, a cave system in the northern ridge. Difficult to find if you don't know it's there. My father used it during the Soviet War. How far? 3 kilometers up a steep path. In her current condition, 3 kilometers of mountain terrain might as well be 30. But options were limited, and having a fallback position was basic tactical sense. Show me on a map, Kat said. As Kareem sketched the route on a piece of paper, Kat's mind returned to her fall from the helicopter. The physics of it still amazed her. Terminal velocity for a human body in freefall position was approximately 120 miles per hour. The trees had slowed her descent, and the snow-covered slope had transformed a vertical drop into a horizontal slide, distributing the impact force over distance rather than concentrating it at a single point. Survivable barely, but only because of her specialized training and background. Sullivan's voice echoed in her memory. In free fall, your body becomes an airfoil. Control the shape, control the fall. She had been controlling falls her entire adult life, from competitive wingsuit flying to military halo jumps. Catherine Blackwood had turned falling into an art form. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very skill Kane had tried to use to kill her had been the key to her survival. The day wore on, the shadows lengthening across Kareem's small home. Kat forced herself to eat the simple but nourishing food Fatima prepared, knowing her body needed fuel to heal. She checked and rechecked her equipment, ensuring the recording device still contained the evidence of Kane's treason. Everything came down to that recording. Without it, this became a case of her word against a decorated Delta Force commander. With it, she had proof of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. As darkness fell, Kat heard the helicopter return its searchlight, sweeping the valley below the village. Closer this time. Too close. They expand their search, Kareem said grimly, peering through a narrow gap in the window covering. Khan must have found something. Kat's hand went to her sidearm, checking it for the dozenth time. If they found her here, she wouldn't go quietly, but a firefight would endanger Kareem and his family people, who had risked everything to help her. I should leave, she said. Draw them away from the village. Kareem shook his head firmly. In darkness with your injuries, you would not make it half a kilometer before they found you. He was right, but the alternative might be worse. If Khan connected her to this village, everyone here would be at risk. The helicopter made another pass lower this time, its downdraft rattling the windows of the small house. Then abruptly it veered away, heading toward the southern mountains. A diversion, Kareem surmised. Something to draw them off. Kat nodded, relief washing through her. Someone was helping them. Perhaps other villagers who shared Kareem's dislike of Khan, or perhaps something else entirely. The radio crackled to life, startling them both. Phoenix checkmate, Rook, do you copy? The voice was unfamiliar but used proper authentication codes. Kat grabbed the handset. Phoenix copies. Go ahead, Rook. Package arrival accelerated. ETA 3 hours. Confirm extraction point. 3 hours. Sullivan had found a way to reach her sooner than expected. A surge of hope cut through the pain and exhaustion. Confirmed. Village location as primary extraction. Be advised, hostiles have local tracker, Nazir Khan. A pause then, understood Phoenix. Ironside says Khan is an old acquaintance. Prepare for noisy reunion. Kat couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Sullivan had history with Khan. That was a story she looked forward to hearing, assuming she lived long enough. 3 hours, Kareem said after she set down the radio. We must prepare you for travel. Over the next hour, they created a more sustainable medical setup for Kat's injuries. Kareem fashioned a better sling using materials from the village. Fatima prepared a mixture of local herbs and military-grade painkillers that, when combined, provided significant relief without the mental fogging that came with higher doses of opiates. Tariq returned with news that the helicopter had landed on the southern ridge. They established a base camp, he reported. The Americans argue with Khan. The leader struck one of his own men. Dissension in the ranks. Interesting. Cat filed that information away, wondering which of Kane's team was having second thoughts about hunting down a fellow American soldier. In the village, Alex asked, any signs they suspect I'm here? Tariq shook his head. They focus on the southern caves. Khan believes you would seek natural shelter, not human help. A reasonable assumption for someone who didn't know her history with this village. Cat had cultivated relationships with local communities precisely because most American forces neglected to do so, creating an intelligence advantage her enemies consistently underestimated. 2 hours to extraction. Cat forced herself to her feet, ignoring the protest from her battered body. She needed to test her mobility to see what she was capable of if things went sideways. The simple act of walking across Kareem's small home sent waves of pain radiating from her broken ribs and collarbone. But it was manageable. The herbs and medication were doing their job. She could move, could function, not at full capacity, but enough to survive. Next, she checked her weapons. The 9mm Beretta was clean and loaded with 2 spare magazines. Her combat knife was secure in its sheath. Not much of an arsenal against 5 Delta operators and a local militia leader, but it would have to do. The recording device was still functioning, a small green light, confirming that the evidence of Kane's betrayal remained intact. That evidence was more important than her life now. It had to reach Colonel Harrington, had to expose the corruption that had led to this moment. 1 hour to extraction. Cat sat by the window watching the village for any signs of Khan's approach. The night was clear stars blanketing the sky above the Hindu Kush mountains. In another context, it might have been beautiful. Your friends, Kareem asked, settling beside her. How will they come? Quietly if possible, Cat replied, but prepared for a fight if necessary. Kareem nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. Your Ironside, he is important to you. Cat considered the question. He trained me, pushed me harder than anyone, saw something in me I didn't see in myself. A father figure, Kareem observed. I suppose so. My real father died when I was young. Sullivan, he filled some of that void. Kareem smiled. It is good to have such bonds. They give us strength when our bodies fail us. The sound came without warning, a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, followed by the distinctive report of a high-powered rifle. A second later, the night erupted with gunfire. The southern ridge, Kareem said, peering through the window. Someone attacks the Americans. Cat joined him at the window, wincing as her sudden movement aggravated her injuries. In the distance, she could see muzzle flashes on the ridge where Kane had established his base camp. A firefight was underway. Not your friends? Kareem asked. Cat shook her head. Too soon, and Sullivan wouldn't announce himself like that. Another possibility occurred to her. Local militia Taliban. Kareem considered this. Possible. Khan has many enemies. Or perhaps, he didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Perhaps this was a diversion created by those loyal to Kareem to draw attention away from the village before the extraction. Whatever the cause, it created an opportunity. With Kane's team engaged on the southern ridge, the extraction team would have a cleaner approach to the village. The radio crackled again. Phoenix checkmate Bishop, 30 minutes to your position. Confirm status. Cat grabbed the handset. Phoenix copies, position secure. Be advised, firefight in progress on southern ridge. Unclear combatants. Understood, Phoenix. Ironside says that's our doorbell. Prepare for extraction. 30 minutes. Cat gathered her limited equipment, securing the recording device in an inner pocket of her tactical vest. Kareem and his family prepared as well, removing all evidence of her stay in their home. You have done more for me than I can ever repay, Cat told them as the minutes ticked down. If there's ever anything you need. Kareem waved away her words. We are friends, Sergeant Blackwood. In these mountains, friendship is more valuable than gold. A soft knock at the door startled them all. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more, a recognition pattern Cat had established during previous visits. Kareem opened the door cautiously. A young boy of perhaps 12 stood there breathing hard as if he'd been running. Men come, the boy gasped in Pashto. From the east, Americans with night eyes. Night vision goggles. The extraction team was approaching. How many? Cat asked in the boy's language. 6, old men with young movements. That sounded like Sullivan and his team, all right. Veterans older but still dangerous. Tell them we're ready, Cat instructed. The boy nodded and disappeared into the darkness. 10 minutes later, William Ironside Sullivan entered Kareem's home. At 61, he looked every bit the weathered warrior, his face mapped with lines earned through decades of service. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing as they swept the room before settling on Cat. You look like hell, Blackwood, he said gruffly. Good to see you too, Sergeant, Cat replied, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Sullivan crossed the room in 3 strides, his movements belying his age. He examined her injuries with a professional eye, his face revealing nothing. Broken collarbone, cracked ribs, probable concussion, and you're standing. Not bad for someone who fell from 8,000 feet without a chute. I had a good teacher. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Damn right you did. Now let's get you out of here before Kane figures out he's been played. Cat turned to Kareem and his family. Thank you for everything. The Afghan man clasped her hand. I'll go with you, Sergeant Blackwood. Return to us someday when the mountains are peaceful. Sullivan led Cat outside where 5 other men waited, all former special operators by their bearing. They formed a protective perimeter around her as they moved through the darkened village toward the eastern ridge. Sit rep, Sullivan demanded as they walked, matching his pace to Cat's injured gait. Kane and his Delta team were paid to eliminate me. I've got the whole confession recorded. They're working for Nazir Khan and someone higher up the chain facilitating weapons smuggling through the Korangal. Sullivan nodded, unsurprised. Harrington suspected as much. That's why he activated us off-the-books operation Deniable if it goes south. The firefight on the southern ridge, local militia, friends of Kareem's. They owed me a favor from the old days. Of course, Sullivan had connections here. The man had been running operations in Afghanistan since the Soviet era when American advisors had armed and trained the Mujahideen. Your extraction plan? Cat asked, each step sending fresh pain through her injured body. Chinook waiting at a landing zone 3 clicks east. We get there, we're home free. 3 kilometers. In her condition, it might as well be a marathon. But Rangers didn't quit, and Catherine Blackwood certainly wasn't going to be the first. They moved through the darkness with the practiced efficiency of veteran operators. Sullivan's team had clearly worked together before communicating with hand signals and maintaining perfect spacing. 2 men on point, 2 covering the flanks, 1 watching their 6 with Sullivan himself staying close to Cat. The terrain grew steeper as they left the village behind, climbing toward the extraction point. Cat's breathing became labored, each inhalation sending sharp pains through her broken ribs. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold night air. Sullivan noticed her struggling, but said nothing, respecting her enough not to offer help she hadn't requested. Instead, he adjusted the pace slightly, finding a rhythm that allowed her to manage the pain without slowing their progress too much. 20 minutes into their trek, the point man raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Sullivan moved forward to confer, then returned to Cat's side. Movement ahead. 2 individuals moving parallel to our route. Khan's men, Cat asked. Possibly, or village hunters. Either way, we avoid contact if possible. They adjusted their route, moving higher up the ridgeline to bypass the unknown individuals. The new path was steeper, more challenging. Cat gritted her teeth against the pain, focusing on placing 1 foot in front of the other. Halfway up the incline, her injured knee buckled. She would have fallen if Sullivan hadn't caught her arm, steadying her with a grip that was firm but careful of her injuries. I've got you, he said quietly. I can make it, she insisted. He nodded, never doubting her. I know you can, but there's no shame in leaning on your team when you're injured. Coming from Sullivan, who had pushed her to complete training exercises with broken bones, it was a significant concession. Cat accepted his support, letting him take some of her weight as they continued upward. The ridge crested to reveal a small plateau perfect for helicopter landing. The extraction point. They'd made it. Sullivan directed his team to establish a perimeter while he helped Cat to a sheltered position behind a large boulder. 15 minutes to pick up, he said, checking his watch. How's the pain? Manageable, Cat lied, knowing he could see through it but would respect the fiction. He reached into his pack, removing a small medical kit. Army's got better drugs these days. This will help without fogging your mind. The injection worked quickly, dulling the worst edges of the pain without the disconnected feeling of stronger opiates. Cat felt her breathing ease as the medication took effect. The recording, she said, reaching into her vest to retrieve the device Rivera had given her. You need to hear this. Sullivan took the device, his expression grave as he listened to Kane's confession through a small earpiece. His face hardened with each word, decades of discipline, control, barely containing his anger. Treason, he said, finally returning the device to her. Pure and simple. There's more to it, Cat said. Kane mentioned future considerations beyond the money. Someone higher up is involved. Harrington thinks it might go all the way to General Thornfield. He's been pushing for expanded operations in sectors where Khan's smuggling routes run. The pieces were falling into place, Thornfield creating a pretext for military presence that actually facilitated smuggling rather than preventing it. Kane and his team as the ground-level operators. Khan providing local knowledge and connections, and Catherine Blackwood as the obstacle that needed removing. A sudden burst of gunfire erupted from the southern slope closer than before. The firefight was moving toward them. Looks like Kane broke contact, Sullivan observed. He'll figure out the diversion soon if he hasn't already. As if on cue, the radio crackled. Checkmate Bishop to extraction team. Be advised, hostiles moving northward toward your position. ETA 10 minutes. Sullivan acknowledged the warning, then turned to his team. Defensive positions. We hold until extraction arrives. The veterans move with practiced efficiency, utilizing the natural terrain to create interlocking fields of fire. Anyone approaching the plateau would face coordinated resistance from multiple angles. Can you shoot? Sullivan asked, Cat nodding toward her injured arm. Left-handed if I have to, she replied, drawing her Beretta with her uninjured right hand. But I'm better than nothing. He smiled grimly. You've always been better than most, Blackwood. That's why they wanted you dead. The compliment, delivered in Sullivan's typically understated manner, meant more than any formal commendation. This man had seen the best operators of 3 decades. His approval wasn't given lightly. The first signs of approach came 7 minutes later. Movement in the tree line below the plateau, shadows moving with tactical precision. 5 individuals, reported one of Sullivan's team, moving in standard assault formation. Kane's Delta team. They had figured out the diversion and tracked them to the extraction point. Where's Khan? Cat asked, scanning the approaches through her pain-blurred vision. Not visible. Probably hanging back, letting the Americans take the risks. Smart. Khan had survived decades in these mountains by knowing when to fight and when to let others do the fighting. Sullivan keyed his radio. Checkmate Bishop, this is Ironside. Hostiles have our position. Need immediate extraction. The response was immediate. Roger Ironside, Chinook, inbound 3 minutes. 3 minutes. They needed to hold off a Delta Force team for 3 minutes. Against operators of lesser skill, it might have been easy. Against Kane and his men, it would be a near thing. No killing unless absolutely necessary, Sullivan instructed his team. These men are Americans despite their actions, aimed to disable. The order complicated their defense, but was the right call. This wasn't a battlefield engagement against foreign enemies, it was an extraction operation against American soldiers who had betrayed their oaths. The legal and moral considerations were complex. The first shot came from below, around, impacting the rock near Cat's position. A warning, not a serious attempt to hit her. Kane wanted her alive now, wanted to confirm the kill personally. Sullivan's team returned fire, careful shots aimed at extremities rather than center mass. The exchange escalated quickly, bullets chipping stone and kicking up dirt across the plateau. Through gaps in the firefight, Cat heard the distinctive whump of helicopter rotors approaching. The Chinook was coming. They just had to hold on. A movement to her right caught her attention, a figure scaling the ridge from an unexpected angle using the firefight as cover. The moonlight glinted off a distinctive scar that ran from eye to cheek. Khan, the smuggler, had circled around while Kane's team provided distraction. Cat tried to bring her Beretta to bear, but her injury slowed her. Khan was faster, closing the distance with the practiced ease of a mountain predator. He knocked the weapon from her hand with a precise strike, then grabbed her by the throat. You have been a thorn in my side for too long, he growled in accented English, tightening his grip. Now you die and my mountains are free of you. Cat struggled against his grip, her injured body betraying her as pain flared across her broken ribs and collarbone. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as Khan's fingers crushed her windpipe. With her remaining strength, she drove her knee upward, connecting with his groin. The smuggler's grip loosened momentarily enough for her to gasp a breath and drive her elbow into his solar plexus. Khan staggered back, momentarily winded, but far from defeated. He drew a curved knife from his belt, its blade catching the moonlight. I will take your head back to Kane, he snarled. Prove to him the job is complete. Cat backed away, searching for a weapon, finding nothing. Her Beretta lay several feet away, knocked beyond reach by Khan's initial attack. Her combat knife was in its sheath, but drawing it with her injuries would be too slow. Khan lunged forward, blade slashing toward her throat. Cat managed to deflect the blow with her forearm, feeling the knife bite into flesh, but missing the arteries. Pain lanced through her arm, adding to the symphony of agony from her existing injuries. Khan pressed his advantage, driving her backward toward the edge of the plateau. One more step, and there would be nothing but air behind her, another fatal fall, but this time without the benefit of trees to break her descent. As Khan moved in for the kill, a shadow materialized behind him. Sullivan moving with the silent precision of a lifetime operator. He struck once a devastating blow to the base of Khan's skull with the butt of his rifle. The smuggler dropped like a puppet with cut strings. "Old acquaintance?" Cat managed her voice raspy from Khan's attempted strangulation. "We've met," Sullivan replied dryly, securing Khan with plastic restraints. He was younger then, faster. Weren't we all? The sound of the Chinook grew louder as the massive helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, its rotors beating the mountain air into submission. Sullivan's team adjusted their fire to cover the landing zone while maintaining pressure on Kane's position. The CH-47 settled onto the plateau in a cloud of dust and small stones, its rear ramp lowering to reveal a medical team waiting inside. "Time to go!" Sullivan shouted over the rotor noise, helping Cat toward the aircraft. "Can you make it?" Cat nodded, ignoring the pain that threatened to overwhelm her with each step. 20 feet to the ramp, 15, 10. A single shot rang out distinct from the covering fire being exchanged. Cat felt something punch into her back, driving her forward. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Sullivan was beside her instantly, his weathered face tight with concern. "Blackwood?" "I'm okay," she gasped, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Vest caught it. Whether it had or not was irrelevant. They had to get on that helicopter. With Sullivan's help, Cat staggered the remaining distance to the ramp, practically falling into the waiting arms of the medical team. As they pulled her inside, Cat caught a glimpse of the shooter, Derek Kane himself, standing at the edge of the tree line, his rifle still raised. Their eyes met across the distance, a moment of mutual recognition and understanding. This wasn't over. The Chinook lifted off, banking away from the plateau, as Sullivan's team provided final covering fire. Medical personnel swarmed around Cat, cutting away her tactical vest to assess her injuries. "Bullet hit the trauma plate," one medic reported. "Bruising and possible additional rib fracture, but no penetration. Small mercies." Cat let her head fall back against the stretcher as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving her awash in pain and bone-deep exhaustion. Sullivan appeared at her side, his expression unreadable, as the medical team worked around him. "The evidence?" he asked. Cat reached into her inner pocket, retrieving the recording device. "Safe." He took it, securing it in his own gear. "Rest now. You've done your part. We'll handle the rest." As the powerful painkillers administered by the medical team began to take effect, Cat felt the tension that had sustained her beginning to ebb. She had survived against impossible odds. She had lived through a fall that should have killed her, evaded capture by elite operators, and secured evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of military command. But as consciousness began to slip away, one thought remained clear in her mind: Derek Kane was still out there, and men like him didn't leave loose ends. The mission wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Part 3: Justice and Redemption. The sterile scent of antiseptic pulled Catherine Blackwood from unconsciousness. Her eyes fluttered open to reveal the familiar environment of a military hospital. White walls, rhythmic beeping of monitors, the subtle hiss of oxygen. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Then memory flooded back: the fall, the survival, the extraction. Each recollection brought with it an echo of pain, though now dulled by what she assumed were industrial-strength painkillers flowing through her system. Welcome back to the land of the living. Cat turned her head to find Colonel James Harrington seated beside her bed. At 68, Harrington retained the ramrod posture of a lifetime soldier, despite his silver hair and lined face. His eyes, however, held the same sharp intelligence they had 30 years ago when he'd served with her father. "How long?" Cat managed, her throat raw. 3 days, Harrington replied, pouring a small cup of water and helping her drink. "You've been in and out, more out than in. Doctors say you're lucky to be alive." "Doesn't feel like luck," she muttered, becoming increasingly aware of the catalog of pain beneath the medication. 4 broken ribs, fractured, collarbone torn, ACL concussion, various lacerations, and contusions. Harrington recited her injuries with clinical precision. "And that's just from the fall. The gunshot impact fractured another rib, and Khan's attempt to strangle you bruised your larynx. When you put it that way, I sound fragile." A ghost of a smile touched Harrington's face. On the contrary, Blackwood, the medical team said anyone else would be dead several times over. Cat adjusted her position, slightly wincing as pain flared through her ribs despite the medication. The recording, safe and damning. Kane's confession is clear enough to hang him and his entire team. What about Khan? In custody at Bagram, he's talking, trying to cut a deal. Mentions of General Thornfield keep coming up. Cat nodded unsurprised. The conspiracy went high just as they'd suspected. Where are we? She asked, realizing she didn't know which medical facility she was in. Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. You were airlifted here after initial stabilization in Afghanistan. Harrington leaned forward. You're safe, Blackwood, for now. The qualifier wasn't lost on her, for now. Harrington's expression turned grave. Thornfield has influence, significant influence, and friends in Washington. The moment he realizes we have evidence against him, he'll move to contain the situation. Contain. Cat used the euphemism. Nice way to say kill. Precisely. Which is why we're keeping your survival quiet for now. Officially, Staff Sergeant Catherine Blackwood died in a helicopter accident in Afghanistan. Training mishap, very tragic. Cat processed this information. Being officially dead had tactical advantages, especially when the people trying to actually kill you believe the cover story. Ironside coordinating security with some old colleagues, men from his generation, who understand loyalty, still means something. Harrington checked his watch. He should be here soon. As if summoned by his name, William Sullivan appeared in the doorway. He'd exchanged his tactical gear for civilian clothes, but nothing could disguise the warrior's bearing that defined him. About time you woke up, he said gruffly, crossing to her bedside. His eyes, however, revealed relief that contradicted his tone. Had us worried. Takes more than a fall from 8,000 feet to keep me down. Cat replied, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as pain shot through her ribs. Apparently. Sullivan turned to Harrington. Security perimeter is established. My people have control of all access points to this wing. If Thornfield's people come, we'll know. Harrington nodded, satisfied. Good. We need 48 hours to complete the documentation and secure the necessary arrest warrants. What about Kane and his team? Cat asked. Off-grid, Sullivan replied. They reported equipment failure led to your death, then requested immediate reassignment. Currently listed as on leave pending new orders. Running scared, Harrington suggested. Or regrouping. Cat wasn't so sure. Men like Derek Kane didn't leave loose ends. And if he had any suspicion she'd survived, he'd come for her. But arguing the point wouldn't change their security protocols, so she shifted focus. The evidence, where is it now? Being processed through secure channels, Harrington replied. I have contacts in the Inspector General's office who can be trusted. Once the documentation is complete, we'll move simultaneously against Thornfield and Kane. It was a good plan, clean, efficient by the book. It would fail. Cat had seen enough corrupt officials evade justice to know that the system could be manipulated by those with sufficient power and connections. Thornfield hadn't reached his position without building a network of influence and protection. Traditional channels, even supposedly secure ones, could be compromised. But this wasn't the time to voice such concerns. Not when she was flat on her back in a hospital bed, barely able to move without pain shooting through her broken body. Get some rest, Harrington advised, rising from his chair. We'll talk more when you're stronger. After they left, Cat lay staring at the ceiling, her mind working despite the fog of painkillers. The official story gave her an advantage. Being dead meant no one was looking for her. But it also limited her options. She couldn't access her regular resources or contacts without revealing her survival. She needed to heal, needed to regain her strength, because instinct told her this fight was far from over. 2 days passed in a haze of medical examinations, physical therapy, assessments, and carefully managed pain medication. Cat pushed herself in small ways, testing the limits of her injured body, preparing for whatever might come. On the third morning, Sullivan appeared with civilian clothes and a wheelchair. Time to move, he announced without preamble. What's happened? Cat asked, immediately alert. Thornfield's aide was seen at Ramstein Air Base yesterday. Could be coincidence. You don't believe in coincidences? Cat noted, already pushing herself into a sitting position, despite the protest from her ribs. Neither do you. Can you dress yourself, or do you need help? I've got it. Privacy was one luxury Cat wasn't willing to sacrifice, even with injuries that made simple movements challenging. 15 minutes later, wearing jeans, a loose button-up shirt that fit over her medical brace, and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes, Cat was wheeled through the back corridors of the medical center. Sullivan pushed the chair, while one of his former ranger colleagues walked ahead, another behind, creating a protective bubble around her. They exited through a service entrance where a nondescript van waited. The transfer from wheelchair to vehicle was painful but accomplished without incident or exposure. "Where are we going?" Cat asked as Sullivan slid into the driver's seat. "Safe house. Off the books." He pulled away from the hospital, driving with the careful precision of someone determined not to attract attention. "Harrington will meet us there once he's secured the arrest warrants." The journey took nearly 2 hours, winding through the German countryside until they reached a small farmhouse nestled in a valley near the French border. Remote without being isolated, defensible without being obvious. Inside the farmhouse, it was modestly furnished but well-equipped. Medical supplies were arranged on the kitchen table. Communications equipment occupied one corner of the living room. Weapons were conspicuously present, but not ostentatiously displayed. "Cold War-era CIA safe house," Sullivan explained as he helped Cat to a comfortable chair. "Officially decommissioned in the 90s, unofficially maintained by people who understood the value of having places the system doesn't know about." "People like you," Cat observed. "People who learn that sometimes the greatest threats come from within." The statement hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken history. Cat had always suspected Sullivan's career had included operations too sensitive for official acknowledgement. Now she was benefiting from the network and resources he'd built during those years. The next 24 hours passed in relative calm. Cat continued her self-imposed physical therapy, pushing her recovery while being careful not to re-injure herself. Sullivan's team maintained security with professional efficiency, rotating watches, and regularly checking the perimeter. On the evening of the second day, Sullivan received a call that transformed his typically stoic expression into something harder, colder. "What is it?" Cat asked when he ended the call. "Thornfield's people got to the evidence. The recording is gone." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Gone. Seized as part of an ongoing investigation. Official channels compromised just as we feared." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Harrington is on his way here. He's being followed." The implications were clear. Their carefully constructed plan had failed. Worse, they had led Thornfield's people directly to them. "How long?" Cat asked, already mentally cataloging available weapons and escape routes. 2 hours, maybe less. "And our backup is limited. Most of my contacts have been monitored since the extraction. Thornfield's people are thorough." Cat forced herself to her feet, ignoring the pain that radiated from her mending ribs and collarbone. "Then we need a new plan, one that doesn't rely on official channels or external support." Sullivan studied her with an expression that mingled concern and professional assessment. "What do you have in mind?" "Thornfield wants the evidence destroyed and witnesses eliminated. Let's give him a chance to do exactly that, but on our terms." A slow smile spread across Sullivan's weathered face as understanding dawned. "A trap," Cat confirmed, "with me as the bait. Thornfield doesn't know I survived. That's our advantage. You're in no condition for direct confrontation." "I don't need to be. I just need to be visible enough to draw them in and smart enough to control the engagement." Sullivan considered this his tactical mind working through the implications. "It could work, but it's high risk. Higher risk than waiting for them to find us here with limited resources and compromised security." He conceded the point with a nod. "What do you need?" "First, we need to warn Harrington without alerting his followers. Then we need to set the stage for Thornfield's people to find exactly what they expect: a wounded witness who can be easily eliminated." Over the next hour, they developed the plan. It was elegant in its simplicity, relying on fundamental human psychology rather than complex tactics. People saw what they expected to see. Thornfield's people expected a wounded, vulnerable target attempting to hide. They would provide exactly that appearance while preparing a very different reality. Harrington arrived 90 minutes later alone. He had managed to evade his followers through a series of driving maneuvers that spoke to training well beyond the typical Pentagon officer's experience. "They've moved faster than anticipated," he reported grimly. "Thornfield has initiated an internal investigation into unauthorized operations in Afghanistan. He's positioning himself as the one uncovering corruption rather than perpetrating it." "Classic misdirection," Sullivan observed, "while he hunts down the actual evidence and witnesses." "Precisely. And he has resources I hadn't anticipated. Military intelligence assets have been redirected to this operation without proper authorization." Cat exchanged glances with Sullivan. The situation was deteriorating more rapidly than expected. "We've developed an alternative approach," she said, outlining their plan to Harrington. The colonel listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to consideration. "It's unorthodox," he said finally, "and extremely dangerous for you personally. With respect, sir, I'm already dead according to official records. That gives me freedom of action no one else has." Harrington couldn't argue with that logic. What about Kane? He's still out there. And if Thornfield is moving this aggressively, they're likely coordinating. "Kane is predictable," Cat replied. "He's a hammer that sees every problem as a nail. If he thinks I'm vulnerable, he'll come himself. His ego demands it." "And that's what we're counting on," Sullivan added. "Men like Kane need to see their victims' eyes, need to know they've won personally." Harrington sighed, the weight of decades of military service evident in his bearing. "I've spent my career believing in the system even when it was flawed, believing it could be fixed from within." "Sometimes the system needs a shock to reset," Cat said quietly. "This is that shock." With reluctance but firm resolve, Harrington nodded his agreement. The plan was set in motion. 4 hours later, Catherine Blackwood sat alone in a small hunting cabin 10 miles from the safe house. Her injuries were real, but now they were also part of her tactical advantage. Thornfield's people would expect her to be diminished vulnerable. They would approach with confidence bordering on arrogance. They would be wrong. The cabin had been carefully prepared. Sightlines established, approaches, monitored, escape routes secured. Most importantly, multiple recording devices had been hidden throughout the structure, each on independent power sources with remote transmission capabilities. If Thornfield's people came to silence her, they would instead provide the very evidence they sought to destroy. Sullivan and Harrington were positioned nearby but out of sight, coordinating the operation through encrypted communications. Their presence was both reassurance and tactical necessity. In her current condition, Cat couldn't handle multiple adversaries alone, but she could serve as the perfect bait. Nightfall brought with it a light rain that misted the forest surrounding the cabin. Cat kept the lights low, presenting the image of someone attempting to remain inconspicuous, while creating enough visibility to confirm her presence to watching eyes. The waiting was always the hardest part. Despite years of operational experience, the quiet moments before engagement still tested her discipline. Her injuries added another layer of challenge, each small movement a reminder of her physical limitations. At precisely 22:17, the proximity sensor hidden in the trees 200 yards east of the cabin triggered. Someone was approaching. The careful pattern of movement suggested military training rather than local hunters or hikers. "Contact east," Cat murmured into her concealed microphone. "Single individual tactically advanced." Sullivan's voice came through her earpiece. "Acknowledged. Holding position?" The plan called for allowing the first individual to approach unchallenged. They needed to confirm identity and intent before engaging. Cat positioned herself in the cabin's main room, deliberately favoring her injured side, presenting the image of a wounded soldier unaware of imminent threat. Through the cabin's window, she maintained situational awareness while appearing casual to any observer. Movement at the tree line, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness. The figure paused, scanning the cabin with practiced precision, then advanced using available cover. Professional. Methodical. As the figure drew closer, features became discernible through the rain and darkness. The distinctive build and movement pattern were unmistakable. "Kane," Cat confirmed quietly, approaching solo from the east. "Overconfident," Sullivan assessed. "Just as we predicted." Cat allowed herself a grim smile. Derek Kane, Master Sergeant, Delta Force Operator Predator, had come personally to finish what he'd started. His pride demanded nothing less. When Kane reached the small covered porch, Cat moved to the cabin's kitchen area, keeping the main room in her peripheral vision. The door opened slowly, cautiously revealing Kane's silhouette against the night. He entered with weapon drawn, sweeping the room with practiced efficiency. Cat allowed herself to be discovered, feigning startled surprise. "You're supposed to be dead," Kane said, his voice carrying the flat affect of a man who had crossed moral lines so many times he no longer recognized their existence. "Sorry to disappoint," Cat replied deliberately, shifting to highlight her injuries. Kane advanced into the room, maintaining tactical distance, his weapon-trained center mass. "You're full of surprises, Blackwood. Surviving that fall, evading capture, making it back to friendly territory." A cold smile touched his lips. "But this is where your story ends. Why, Kane, why betray everything for money?" The question was calculated to engage his ego, to keep him talking, while the recording devices captured every word. Thornfield might have seized the original evidence, but they were creating new, more damning material with every passing moment. "Money was just the beginning," Kane replied. "Thornfield has plans, big plans. the kind that makes certain people very rich and very powerful, the kind that rewrites the rules of engagement. Smuggling Soviet-era weapons, that's the big plan. Kane laughed, a sound devoid of humor. That's just the funding mechanism. The real operation involves reshaping regional power structures, creating controlled instability, the kind that justifies permanent American military presence and unlimited defense contracts. As he spoke, Cat noted movement through the window behind him, additional figures approaching from the west. Thornfield's people right on schedule. "And you're just a good soldier following orders?" Cat said, keeping Kane engaged while monitoring the new arrivals. "I'm a realist. The world doesn't run on honor and duty, Blackwood. It runs on power. Thornfield understands that. He's positioning himself and his allies for the next phase of American military engagement. The smart play is to be on the winning side." "And what about the oath you took to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic?" Something flickered in Kane's eyes, not remorse exactly, but perhaps recognition of how far he had strayed from the path he'd once walked. "Idealism dies hard, doesn't it, Blackwood? Even after they threw you from a helicopter." He adjusted his grip on his weapon. "I'll make this quick." Professional courtesy. The cabin door opened behind him. Two men entered, both wearing civilian clothes, but moving with unmistakable military precision. One Cat didn't recognize. The other was familiar from Pentagon briefings: Lieutenant Colonel Richard Foster, General Thornfield's aide and presumed enforcer. Kane, Foster acknowledged. "I see you found our loose end." "Just finishing the job," Kane replied without taking his eyes off Cat. "Should have been completed in Afghanistan." Foster surveyed the scene, his cold gaze assessing Cat with clinical detachment. "Staff Sergeant Blackwood, officially deceased. Impressive survival from your training accident." His tone made the euphemism clear. "Unfortunately, your miraculous recovery ends tonight." Thornfield sent his errand boy. Cat goaded, deliberately provocative. "Couldn't face me himself." Foster's expression hardened. "General Thornfield is securing his position while we clean up this mess, a mess that now includes you, Kane, and anyone else who can connect him to unauthorized operations in Afghanistan." The statement hung in the air for a moment before its implications registered with Kane. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion, then to the dawning realization of betrayal. "What are you talking about?" Kane demanded, his weapon still trained on Cat, but his attention now divided. "You're a loose end too, Master Sergeant," Foster explained with cold efficiency. "Too many connections to questionable activities. The general is implementing a clean slate protocol." Cat watched the dynamic shift exactly as they had planned. Thornfield was eliminating all witnesses, including his own operatives. Classic counterintelligence procedure, turning assets into liabilities. "That wasn't the arrangement," Kane said, tension evident in his posture. "I've been loyal, effective, and now you're a liability," Foster countered. "Nothing personal, just operational security." The second man with Foster had drawn his weapon, aiming not at Cat but at Kane. The Delta operator recognized the threat, his training kicking in as he swiftly adjusted position, using Cat as a partial shield while maintaining awareness of both new threats. The room had transformed into a three-way standoff, exactly the scenario Cat had anticipated. Now came the delicate part, managing the chaos that would follow. "Seems like General Thornfield doesn't value loyalty," Cat observed, deliberately pouring fuel on the fire. "First he betrays his oath to the Constitution, then his promises to his own people." Foster's eyes narrowed. "Enough talk. This ends now." What happened next unfolded with the surreal clarity that often accompanied combat situations. Foster nodded to his companion, who fired at Kane. The Delta operator returned fire while simultaneously shoving Cat toward the kitchen. Bullets tore through the cabin as the three men engaged in a lethal triangle of fire. Cat took the momentum from Kane's push and directed it toward the pre-planned extraction point, a concealed trap door beneath the kitchen table leading to a root cellar and tunnel system dating back to Prohibition. As she dropped through the opening, pain flaring from her injuries, she heard the distinctive report of a high-powered rifle from outside the cabin. Sullivan providing covering fire from his concealed position. The underground passage was low and narrow, forcing Cat to move in a hunched position that aggravated her healing ribs. But pain was a luxury she couldn't afford as she navigated the tunnel by the dim light of a small tactical flashlight. 100 yards brought her to the exit point, a concealed opening in a dry creek bed 50 yards from where Harrington waited with their extraction vehicle. As Cat emerged into the rainy night, the sounds of gunfire continued from the direction of the cabin. Status? Harrington asked as he helped her into the vehicle. Foster turned on Kane. Three-way engagement initiated, Sullivan providing overwatch. Cat settled into the seat, breathing through the pain. Recording devices transmitting to three separate secure servers. We have everything, Kane's confession, Foster confirming Thornfield's involvement, the whole conspiracy laid bare. Relief flooded through Cat. Whatever happened back at the kitchen, the evidence was secure, multiple copies distributed through channels Thornfield couldn't reach or control. Sullivan? She asked, concern for her mentor evident in her voice. Extracting via secondary route. We'll rendezvous at Checkpoint Delta in 30 minutes. Harrington started the engine. You did good, Blackwood. Played it perfectly. As they drove away from the scene, Cat allowed herself a moment of reflection. The plan had worked, but at what cost? More violence, more bloodshed. The necessary evil of confronting corruption that had become too powerful to address through conventional means. 30 minutes later, they arrived at a small airfield where a private jet waited. Sullivan was already there, his tactical gear exchanged for civilian clothes that couldn't hide the warrior's bearing. Foster? Cat asked as they boarded the aircraft. Dead, Sullivan replied simply. Kane too. They eliminated each other while my team extracted the recording devices. A clean end, if not a happy one. Cat felt no joy in the deaths, even of men who had betrayed their oaths and tried to kill her. But she recognized the necessity. Some cancers could only be removed surgically. The jet took off, heading east toward American airspace. Harrington spent most of the flight coordinating with trusted contacts in Washington, preparing for what would come next. Sullivan cleaned his weapons with methodical precision, a ritual that seemed to center him after combat. Cat stared out the window at the Atlantic, passing beneath them, her thoughts on the future. The evidence they had secured would expose Thornfield's conspiracy, but the aftershocks would ripple throughout military command. Good people would be caught in the blast radius. Systems would be questioned. Trust already fragile would be further eroded. Yet there was no alternative. Corruption at this level couldn't be allowed to fester. 3 weeks later, Catherine Blackwood stood in a private Pentagon briefing room. Her injuries were healing, though the doctors said some of the damage would likely be permanent, a small price for surviving what should have been unsurvivable. Across the table sat the Secretary of Defense, flanked by the Joint Chiefs and several Justice Department officials. They had spent the past week reviewing the evidence recordings, financial transactions, operational reports that painted a damning picture of corruption at the highest levels of military command. General Thornfield has been taken into custody, the Secretary announced, along with 17 other officers and officials implicated in the conspiracy. The investigation continues, but the primary threat has been contained. Cat nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The system had ultimately worked, but only after extraordinary measures had been taken outside official channels. Staff Sergeant Blackwood, the Secretary continued, your official status remains killed in action for the moment for your own security. However, once the situation stabilizes, we intend to correct the record and recognize your extraordinary service. Thank you, sir, Cat replied, though recognition was the furthest thing from her mind. In Master Sergeant Sullivan's team, their involvement has been classified at the highest level. Officially, they were never there. The old ways persisted even as the corruption was excised. Some operations remained in the shadows, necessary but unacknowledged. Cat understood the reality even as she questioned its wisdom. After the briefing, Cat found Sullivan waiting in the hallway. Despite his civilian clothes, he stood with the unmistakable bearing of a lifelong soldier. How'd it go? He asked. About as expected. Thornfield's finished the conspiracy, exposed, justice served more or less. Sullivan nodded, understanding the qualification in her tone. Perfect justice is rare in this business. We take what we can get. They walked together toward the building's exit, an odd pair, the young ranger still bearing the visible signs of her ordeal, and the aging warrior whose battles had left less visible but equally permanent marks. What now? Cat asked as they reached the lobby. Back to the Rangers when I'm cleared medically. Sullivan exchanged a look with Colonel Harrington, who had appeared from a side corridor. Something unspoken passed between the older men. Actually, Harrington said, we have a different proposition for you. He handed her a folder unmarked except for a small emblem Cat didn't recognize. Opening it, she found transfer orders to a unit designation she'd never seen before. What is this? A new task force, Harrington explained. Directly under Joint Special Operations Command, but with unique operational parameters. Designed specifically to identify and eliminate internal security threats before they reach the level we just confronted. You're creating a unit to police our own, Cat asked, understanding the implications. Not police protect them, Sullivan corrected. The oath we take isn't to any individual or administration. It's to the Constitution. This unit's mission is to ensure that oath remains sacred. Cat studied the documents, noting that both Harrington and Sullivan were listed as commanding officers. Why me? Because you fell 8,000 feet without a parachute and not only survived, but completed your mission, Harrington replied. Because you understand that sometimes protecting the institution means working outside its normal parameters. Because you never quit even when the system itself betrayed you. The offer was unexpected, but somehow felt right, a new direction born from the crucible of her near-death experience. When do we start? She asked. Sullivan's weathered face creased in a rare smile. We already have. Welcome to the Phoenix program, Blackwood. Officially, we don't exist. Unofficially, we're the last line of defense against the enemy within. As they left the Pentagon together, Kat reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A fall that should have killed her had instead forged her into something new. Something stronger, more resilient, more determined. Rangers led the way, but sometimes the way forward required falling before you could rise again. Like the mythical bird she was now named for, Catherine Blackwood had emerged from the ashes of betrayal, transformed and reborn. The phoenix had fallen, but now she would soar.